Alrighty, in this video what we're going to be doing is we are going to be implementing our awesome command arguments class. So, what is the command arguments class? What does it do? Basically, it is responsible for taking the input of the command line, whatever that may be, if it's a single string or an array of strings, and converting it into an object that can be understood by the rest of the system. So, basically, the majority of our time is going to be spent implementing the FromStringArray factory method, which is just responsible, again, for munging together these two collections. So let's go ahead and jump over into our command line interface tests, and let's go ahead and write some tests for it real fast. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say test. Let's do a public void. So let's do, let's see here. What kind of tests? Arguments, or let's just do, oh, I'm so bad at test names. So what do we want this test to do? Well, we want to be able to convert from a string of a couple of parameters into a command arguments representation. Command arguments parses commands. Ugh, that's such a bad name. Alright, first thing is we first need to represent our parameters. So what are our parameters going to be? So I'm going to say parameters equals new, and then I'm going to say new array, rather. New command parameter, and I'll say, let's start off easy. Type of string, name blah, order 0. And then we'll have another parameter, new command parameter, type of int, name whoa, order 1. And then a new command parameter, type of float, name, stuff, order 2. Then I'm going to say var arguments equals, or var arguments equals new, and then this is a string, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3 dot 42. Actually, it'd be better if I did it like this. For testing purposes, I'll say argument or int argument 2 equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and then const float argument 3 equals 1, 2, 3 dot 42 f, and then I'll say argument 2 dot 2 string and argument 3 dot 2 string. So pretty straightforward. Now we have an array of strings for our arguments. Now we need to combine the two, basically. So I'm going to say command arguments equals command arguments dot from string array, passing in our arguments as the first parameter or as the first argument, and parameters as the second argument. Then I'm going to say command arguments dot get string for 0 should be arguments at 0. Command arguments dot get int at 1 should be argument 2, and command arguments get float 2 should be argument 3, and command arguments dot count should be 3. In fact, I'm going to do the dot count should be 3 at the top, and then do the tests. Alright, so this is our happy path, basically. If everything is working properly, this test should succeed. Basically, all we're seeing here is we're converting this array of parameters into, we're combining an array of parameters and an array of arguments into something that can be understood by our command object, performing all the correct type conversions. Now, as far as type conversions go, we're really only going to be supporting the basic types, so think ints, floats, doubles, decimals, stuff like that. In the future, I do really want to be able to support custom types. Like, imagine a command that takes in a actor, for example, or a player as an argument, and then create a type converter that converts from a player ID into a player object. So that's the kind of stuff I want to be able to support in the future. For our purposes, we're just going to do basic type conversions. For now, anyway. Alright, so now that we have that implemented, let's go ahead and Let's start in a kind of a lopsided way. I want to go ahead and implement the rest of this class and then implement this method. Because in all honesty, the rest of this class is a wrapper over an object array. It's really not that exciting, and I probably should have just written the whole class out in the last video. So let's go ahead and do that. What we need to do is we need a private read-only object array, and I'm going to do that here underneath the static method. Say private read-only object array arguments. And for the count, the method or the property called count is simply going to return arguments.length. The constructor is simply going to say arguments equals arguments. The generic get method is simply going to return arguments at position. The non-generic is going to return arguments at position but without the cast. And the toArray method is simply going to return arguments. Really not that exciting. Now, it will get more exciting once we add features such as optional parameters and named parameters and all that fun stuff. This method or this class will start looking more interesting. Right now, it looks pretty boring. So, with that out of the way, you might, if you guys are still typing, pause the video, because in a sec, I'm going to be jumping up to the top of the file and finishing out that static method to make the test pass. Which, by the way, speaking of that, I never made sure if the test's passed or failed yet. So let's come back here and let's run this test, and it should fail. And it does fail. Good. No reference exception. Oh, yeah. That would be because we returned null right there. Okay, so how do we make this test pass? Well, basically, since these methods... I'm going to go ahead and just write these methods out all the way, including error checking, because they're so simple that I won't have to worry about doing the whole red-green refactor. So I'm going to say var processed arguments. What is processed arguments? Processed arguments is going to be the variable that contains the final array that's going to be inevitably passed into the constructor here. So it's going to be an object array, and the length of it is going to be arguments.length. Now, why are we doing that? Now you might be thinking, wait a sec, that looks a little dangerous. Why are you doing it like that? Because if you think about it, where does this come from? That comes from the command line. That comes from the user. This is not, that parameter that I've highlighted right now is not safe. It could be anything that the user typed in. So why am I, and the return type, the return value, this processed arguments, is going to have to be at least as big as this command parameter, enumerable. However, I don't want to do parameters.count, because that would make it so I have multiple iterations of this IEnumerable, which I don't want. I don't want to do this, copying out our parameters into our own list, because that would be an object instantiation, and it would also require an additional iteration of it. So what I ended up doing is deciding to go ahead and instantiate the processed arguments array to be the same size as the arguments passing in, but then later, while we're running this method, check to make sure that the length of this is the same as the length of this, and if it isn't, throw an exception. So that way we'll avoid the index out of range exception that could potentially happen if you're not careful with this. So anyway, just wanted to point that out for anybody who's looking at that and saying, well, this isn't sanitized input. Why would you trust it to size an array? Well, the reason is we're going to trust it for now, but if it turns out to be not the right size, we'll throw an exception later. All right, then I'm going to say var index equals 0. This is going to be just a counter variable that we're going to be using as we loop through the parameters. Then I'm going to say for each var parameter in parameters. And then I'm going to say if index is greater or equal to processed arguments, or sorry, arguments.length or processed arguments.length, it doesn't make a difference because they're the same length. Throw new argument exception. And we're going to say arguments array must be the same size as parameters found wanted. Alright, let's break this out. Let's go ahead and wrap that in a string format here. I can't wait until C#6 with interpolated strings. That's going to make my life so much better. And found arguments.length. In this case, I will go ahead and say parameters.size. Or sorry, parameters.count. I know it's a multiple iteration of the IEnumerable, but this is an error condition, so I don't really care about the performance implications. Okay, then I'm going to say processed arguments at index equals convert argument, passing in arguments at index and parameter. Then I'm going to say index plus plus. Yes, I'm aware I could have put the index plus plus right there. I am generally not a big fan of having a increment operator inside of a larger expression like that. Typically speaking, I'll break it out into their own line for readability's sake. And then finally, at the end of this, I'm simply going to say return new command arguments, passing in processed arguments. Okay, so now all that's left is writing the convert argument method, which should be pretty straightforward because we have a built-in way of doing this. So I'm going to say public static object convert argument, string argument, command parameter. So the parameter contains the information about what type the argument needs to be, and the string argument was what was passed in from the command line. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up a try block, and I'm simply going to say return convert dot change type, passing an argument as the value, and parameter dot parameter type as the second argument. Then I'm going to say cache exception E, and I'm going to say throw new, and we'll throw a argument exception, I guess. Throw new argument exception saying something like, let's see, string format. We'll do something like cannot convert argument for parameter blank from blank to type blank. All right, the first blank is going to be the parameter name. The second blank is going to be the value we tried to convert, and the third argument is going to be the parameter's expected type, which I'm going to do full name for that. And then after the string format, I'm going to pass in E as the inner exception, so that we get additional information about what exactly was thrown when we tried to do a type conversion. So if you looked at the implementation of convert.changeType, you'll see that it throws exceptions if there's an invalid cast. So that's basically what I'm doing right here. I'm catching a failure to parse the string into the specified type. All right, that's really about it. So now let's come back here and let's run this test again. And we get success. So let's go ahead and write a couple more tests. So I want to test some error conditions. So I want to say public void command arguments throws if conversion not possible. It's a terrible name. I'm going to say parameters. In this case, I'm just going to do one parameter. I'm not too concerned about testing multiple parameters right now because I feel fairly confident my concept of multiple parameters is being handled by this test. So, I know that violates the don't test more than one thing, but really, I don't want to be here for 10 years writing tests for you guys. So, we're just going to do one parameter here. I'm going to say command parameter, and we're going to give it a parameter type of float, a name of blah, and an order of 0. And then arguments will be simply an invalid float. In fact, I can say invalid float right there because that should throw an exception when it tries to change that type. Then I'm going to say action should fail equals command arguments dot from string array arguments parameters. And then I'm going to say should fail, should throw, argument exception. All right, let's test to make sure we get our proper exception thrown. And we do. Sweet. So now I want to do one more test, and that test will verify that at least enough arguments were passed into the command arguments. So I'm going to say command arguments throws if not enough arguments passed in. Var parameters. In this case, I will do 2 parameters. I'll do new command parameter, type doesn't matter, name doesn't matter, order really doesn't matter. Do command parameter, type of float. Not terribly exciting. For arguments, I'm going to simply pass in 1 argument, which will be the proper type. Then I'm going to say action should fail equals command arguments from string array. Ooh, this convert argument should be private. I just noticed that. I'll fix that in a second. Arguments parameters should fail, should throw, argument exception. All right, this should pass 2. All right, so yeah. Now let's go ahead and do the last thing I want to do in this video, which is going over to command arguments and changing this convert argument method from public to private. Just following the whole concept of not exposing things, or exposing as few things as possible. Second thing I want to do, just because I'm a little OCD on this, ReSharper's giving this warning about the multiple execution or multiple enumerations of the enumerable, which just really bugs me. However, I don't turn this warning off because I find it helpful at times where I forget that I'm working with an IEnumerable. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, and I'm going to say inspection options, hit the right key, and then I'm going to say disable once with comment. Or how about disable for method? That'd be better. So disable for method. And what that did was it came up with this suppress message attribute up at the top, which yeah, we'll get rid of that warning, make this code green, and that makes me happy. I think that's about it, really, for this video. So we have our command arguments. We now have our argument parsers. So basically, to support a string instead of a string array, we would just add another method here that performed that parsing as well. This is where we parse our command arguments. So this is also where we do like type conversions and all that fun stuff. Anyway, I think that's about it for this video. So we'll see you guys in the next one. I think in the next video, what I want to do is, I want to do something. Anyway, we'll see you guys then.